USP Victorville, high-security federal penitentiary. The high desert, California. The bus smelled of diesel fumes, unwashed bodies, and the acrid metallic tang of fear. Viktor Volkov sat in the back row, shackled hand and foot to the floor. He didn't look at the other prisoners. He looked out the wire mesh window at the Mojave Desert streaming by. 70 miles an hour. The outside world was a blur of beige dust and scrub brush. Inside the bus, the air was thick with nervous energy. These were hard men, bank robbers, cartel sicarios, gangbangers from South Central LA and Chicago. They were posturing, throwing up signs, already trying to establish dominance before they even hit the receiving bay. Victor just closed his eyes. He was 45 years old. His hair was the color of dirty snow, cropped close to a skull scarred by shrapnel from Grozny and a knife fight in a Siberian transit prison. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, were usually empty. They were eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything human beings could do to one another. He was former GRU Spetsnaz, Vimpel unit, a specialist in sabotage and direct action behind enemy lines. He wasn't a criminal in the traditional sense. He was a weapon that the Russian state had misplaced. He'd been picked up in Seattle on an Interpol red notice for a wet work job in Berlin 3 years prior. The Americans had extradited him, tried him, and buried him. 2 life sentences. "Yo, Blanco!" A voice hissed next to him. A young shot caller from the MS-13, covered in face tattoos, leaned in as much as the chains allowed. "You look lost, Essa. You gonna need friends in Victorville. The blacks, they gonna eat you alive." Victor opened one eye. He looked at the kid the way a wolf looks at a yapping chihuahua. He didn't speak. He just held the gaze until the kid blinked, muttered a curse, and looked away. Victor had survived the Black Dolphin prison in Russia. He had survived Chechen holes in the ground. He had been interrogated by men who treated torture as a fine art. This bus ride, with its air conditioning and these loud children playing gangster, felt almost like a vacation. The processing, the intake was a symphony of calculated dehumanization. Strip, bend over, spread him. The cold blast of delousing powder. The orange jumpsuit that felt like sandpaper against his skin. The guards were loud, screaming instructions like drill sergeants. They loved their power. Victor obeyed every command instantly, efficiently, without emotion. He was the gray man. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted to do his time and fade away. He was assigned to B block, general population. As the heavy steel door to the cell block buzzed open, a wall of noise hit him. It was deafening. Rap music blasting from smuggled radios, screaming arguments across the tiers, the constant clanging of metal on metal. It smelled of industrial bleach, ramen noodles, and stale sweat. The block was a 3-tiered human zoo. As Victor walked the gauntlet on the ground floor, carrying his thin mattress roll, the noise dipped slightly. Eyes were assessing the new fish. In a U.S. federal prison, politics are simple, race is everything. The blacks ran with the blacks, split between DC crews, Crips, Bloods, Muslims. The Hispanics were split between the Serenos, Mexican mafia affiliates, and the Pazis, border crossers. The whites were dominated by the Peckerwoods and, at the top of the food chain, the Aryan Brotherhood, the brand. Victor was white. In their eyes, he belonged to them. He was woodpile. He found his cell. A tiny concrete box he shared with a nervous little Czech forger named Eddie. Eddie took one look at Victor's scarred knuckles and dead eyes and immediately offered him the top bunk. "You new to the feds?" Eddie whispered that night after lockdown. "Yes," Victor replied. His voice was a low rumble, heavy with the accent of the Urals. "Look, man, you gotta check in with the brand. Stone. He runs the white car. If you don't, they'll tax you. Or stick you." "I require nothing from them," Victor said, turning to face the concrete wall. "I wish only to sleep." Eddie whimpered in the dark. "Jesus, buddy. You don't get it. You don't get to just sleep here." The yard check. 2 days later. First time on the big yard. It was a vast expanse of dirt and weight piles under the blistering California sun. Gun towers loomed over every corner. Victor was doing pull-ups on a high bar in the far corner. He did them slowly, methodically. Up, hold for 3 seconds, down. He had done 50 without breaking a sweat. His body was wire and gristle, hardened by decades of abuse. He felt them coming before he heard them, for shadows fell across the dirt beneath him. He finished his set, dropped to the ground, and turned. Standing there was the welcoming committee of the Aryan Brotherhood. In the center was Mason Hammerstone. He was a monster of a man, 6 feet 4 inches, pure steroids and hate. A large shamrock tattoo was on his neck, and SS lightning bolts were on his forearm. He was the shot caller for B-Block. Hammer smiled. It wasn't friendly. It was the smile a butcher gives a side of beef. "Damn, Boris," Hammer said, his voice a deep California drawl. "You got some reps in you for an old-timer. What are you, 50? 45, Victor said calmly. He stood relaxed, hands loosely at his sides. The stance of someone who isn't threatening, but is ready. Right? Listen up.
I'm Hammer.
I run the woodpile here. You're white, you're breathing my air, you're under my umbrella. You understand English, comrade? I understand. Good. Here's how it works. You got paperwork? We need to check your jacket. Make sure you ain't a como, child molester, or a snitch. If you clear, your tax is $20 a week on my books. Commissary, stamps, whatever. You pay the rent, nobody touches you. The blacks try anything, we handle it. Victor looked at Hammer. He looked at the 3 other goons flanking him, trying to look menacing with their prison-made shanks tucked into their waistbands.
Victor Soid.
It was so boring. It was the same playground bullying he had seen in juvenile detention in Moscow in 1988. Only louder. I do not need protection, Victor said. His tone was flat, conversational. Hammer's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. The disrespect was immediate and public. Other inmates on the weight piles stopped lifting to watch. Excuse me? Hammer stepped closer, invading Victor's personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and rotting teeth. I don't think you heard me right, new fish. This ain't a request. This is how you survive. I survived Chechnya, Victor said softly. I survived Lefortovo. You think I need you to survive this summer camp? Hammer blinked. He wasn't used to this. People pissed themselves when he walked up. Summer camp. Hammer laughed. A loud, barking sound meant to intimidate. All right, Ivan. You want to do it the hard way. I like the hard way. You got 24 hours to put money on my books, or we're gonna turn you into a crimson painting in the shower. Welcome to America, bitch. Hammer spat on the ground near Victor's boot and walked away, his crew trailing behind, glaring over their shoulders. Victor didn't watch them go. He turned back to the pull-up bar. He had another 50 reps to do. The shower. They didn't wait 24 hours. They never do. They had to make an example of him quickly, before the other races saw weakness in the white ranks. The next morning, 6 o'clock. The showers were a communal tiled room at the end of the tier, choked with steam. Victor was rinsing shampoo from his hair when the water suddenly cut off. He opened his eyes, wiping the soap away. The shower room had emptied out. Only 3 men remained. It wasn't Hammer. Hammer was a general. He didn't do the dirty work himself. These were his lieutenants. Hard men. Lifers. The leader was a guy named Rooster. Red hair, pale skin covered in racist ink, holding a bone crusher. A heavy combination lock stuffed into a sock. The other 2 had shanks, sharpened toothbrushes wrapped in electrical tape. They fanned out, blocking the exit. The tiled floor was slick with soap and water. Hammer says your rent is overdue. Ivan, Rooster said, swinging the lock sock rhythmically. We're here to collect the late fees. Victor didn't speak. He backed slowly into a corner. Never let them get behind you. He dropped his towel. He was naked, cornered, and unarmed. In Spetsnaz training, they throw you into a pit with a wild dog and tell you to kill it with your bare hands. You learn quickly that pain is irrelevant. You learn that the human body has off switches. Get him, Rooster ordered. The 2 men with shanks lunged forward. They were clumsy, aggressive, used to overwhelming victims with terror and numbers. Victor didn't move until the first blade was inches from his stomach. He exploded. It wasn't a boxing match. It was biomechanics. Victor stepped inside the first attacker's guard, his left forearm deflecting the shank hand outward. Simultaneously, his right palm struck the man's chin. An upward, jarring blow that snapped the head back and shut off the brain. The man dropped without a sound. The second man stabbed at Victor's neck. Victor pivoted on the slick floor, grabbing the attacking wrist. He didn't just block it. He twisted it against the joint. A wet crack echoed in the tiled room. The man screamed as his radius bone snapped. Victor finished him with a knee to the solar plexus, folding him onto the wet tiles. 2 seconds. 2 men down. Rooster stood frozen, the lock sock hanging limp in his hand. He stared at the naked, scarred Russian who hadn't even breathed hard. "My turn?" Victor asked. His voice was void of adrenaline. It was just business. Rooster roared and swung the heavy lock at Victor's head. It was a killing blow. Victor ducked under the swing. He moved in tight, chest to chest with Rooster. He grabbed the back of Rooster's neck with one hand, his thumb digging into a pressure point behind the ear. With the other hand, he grabbed Rooster's windpipe. It wasn't a choke. It was a crush. Rooster gagged, dropping the weapon, clawing at Victor's hands. His eyes bulged. Victor slammed Rooster backward into the tiled wall. Thud. He held him there, pinned, his grip like an iron collar tightening on the man's throat. Rooster's face turned purple. His feet scrabbled on the slippery floor. He was dying. Victor leaned in close. His pale blue eyes were terrifyingly calm. "Tell your master," Victor whispered in Rooster's ear, his Russian accent thick and guttural, "that I am not his property. If he sends dogs again, I will send back meat." Victor released his grip. Rooster collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, retching, clutching his bruised throat. Victor turned off the shower faucet, picked up his towel, dried himself off and wrapped it around his waist. He stepped over the man with the broken arm, who was sobbing quietly. He walked out of the shower room and back toward his cell. The tier was dead silent. Dozens of eyes watched him from behind the bars. The word was already spreading faster than a fire. The new fish wasn't prey. He was something else entirely. In his cell, Eddie was staring at him wide-eyed. He had heard the screams. "My God, Victor," Eddie whispered. "What did you do? Hammer is going to go nuclear. This is war." Victor sat on his bunk and began to neatly fold his orange uniform. "This is not war, Eddie," Victor said, smoothing a wrinkle in the fabric. "War is artillery. War is Grozny burning. This—" He gestured vaguely toward the noisy, chaotic cell block outside. "This is kindergarten with Shanks. USP Victorville. B block. 48 hours after the shower incident. Prison is a closed ecosystem. Information doesn't just travel. It saturates. By the next morning, every inmate in Victorville, from the shot callers of the Mexican mafia to the lowest schneery in the laundry room, knew that something impossible had happened in the showers. 3 of Hammer's enforcers, including his right-hand man Rooster, had been dismantled in less than 30 seconds. No sanks. No blunt objects. Just hands. Victor sat at a bolted-down plastic table in the day room, slowly stirring a bowl of lukewarm oatmeal. A vacuum had formed around him. The other white inmates gave him a wide berth, their eyes darting away whenever he looked up. To them, Victor was a walking dead man. Hammer didn't forgive humiliation, and to be seen talking to the Russian was to volunteer for the same green light that was undoubtedly now hovering over Victor's head. "You're a ghost, Vic," Eddie whispered, sitting across from him. He hadn't touched his food. His hands were shaking so hard his spoon rattled against the plastic tray. "Rooster's in the infirmary with a crushed windpipe. He's on a ventilator." Hammer put the word out. "There's a green light across the whole yard. They'll hit you in the dining hall, the weight pile, the chapel. It doesn't matter. They can't let you breathe." Victor looked up. His eyes were flat, like the surface of a frozen lake. "You know the problem with these people, Eddie?" Victor asked softly. His English was precise, flavored with the gravelly resonance of the Urals. They play at war. They wear the tattoos, they shout about honor and blood. But they have never seen a world actually end. They think this prison is the most dangerous place on earth. Victor pushed the tray aside. They do not understand that I died a long time ago, and you cannot frighten a dead man with a grave. The yard check. 1,300 hours. The California sun was a physical weight, baking the dust of the exercise yard. Victorville was divided by invisible borders. By the pull-up bars, the blacks. By the handball courts, the Serenos. The far corner, near the brick wall, the woodpile, the Aryan Brotherhood's territory. Victor walked onto the yard with his usual economical stride. He didn't look for protection. He didn't check his 6 every 3 seconds like a nervous rookie. He walked straight toward the track to get his miles in. "Hey, Russo!" A voice called out from the shade of the handball courts. A lean, wiry man with a pencil-thin mustache stepped out from a group of tattooed Latinos. This was Paco. He was a key holder for the Mexican mafia, La-Im, within the block, a middleman who handled the flow of narcotics and information. "I heard you gave Hammer's boys a masterclass in the showers," Paco said, a gold tooth glinting as he smirked. "Hammer is losing his mind, Essa. He's put a bounty on you. 5,000 stamps and enough clear to keep the whole block high for a month for whoever puts you in a bag." Victor stopped. He didn't turn his whole body, just his head. "The price is low," Victor said. "Your Hammer must be struggling if my life is worth so little." A few of the men behind Paco chuckled. They liked the brass on this Russian. In the feds, arrogance is often mistaken for strength, but with Victor it wasn't arrogance, it was an assessment of facts. "Listen, gringo," Paco's expression sharpened. "My bosses are impressed. Hammer has been acting like he owns the sun for too long. We want to offer you the umbrella. Come sit in our section. You work for us as a specialist and nobody touches you. We need a man with your mechanical skills." Victor looked at Paco for a long moment. It was the look a high-ranking officer gives a civilian trying to explain tactics. "I am not a mercenary for your street gangs, Paco," Victor said. "I served the GRU. I do not trade one cage for another. Tell your bosses thank you, but I walk alone." Paco's smirk vanished. "You walk alone, you walk into a hole, Russo. Hammer is bringing in the heavies. He's calling in a favor from C-Block. A guy named the Ogre. He's not a fighter. He's a butcher. Let him come," Victor said, turning back to the track. "I could use the exercise. The ambush, the dining hall. The dining hall is the most dangerous room in any high-security prison. It's loud, crowded, and the guards are usually stationed at the exits, not among the tables. It is a place of chaos." Victor was halfway through a tray of mystery meat and stale bread when the atmosphere shifted. It's a sensory thing, the gray man training kicks in. The decibel level of the room dropped by 5%. The clatter of plastic trays became rhythmic. Sector assessment. North exit blocked by 3 AB scouts. East side clear. West side. There. Walking through the center of the hall was a man who looked like he had been built out of scrap iron and bad intentions. This was the Ogre. He was a 6'6" behemoth with a shaved head and a face so scarred it looked like a topographical map of a disaster zone. Behind him were 6 others, all armed with long boys. Shanks made from sharpened locker supports, nearly 10 inches long. The guards at the back of the room suddenly found something very interesting to look at on their clipboards. The green light had been paid for in more than just stamps. The staff was looking the other way. Victor didn't stand up. He kept eating. He took a sip of the watered-down juice. The Ogre reached the table. He kicked Eddie's stool, sending the terrified man scrambling across the floor. The Ogre leaned over, his massive hands gripping the edge of the bolted table. "You the Russian?" The Ogre's voice sounded like stones grinding together. Victor looked up. He didn't look at the Shanks. He looked at the Ogre's eyes. They were yellowed, blown out by years of steroid abuse and rage. "I am Victor," he said, "and you are blocking my light." The Ogre didn't waste time with a witty comeback. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a jagged piece of steel wrapped in a torn bedsheet. He lunged across the table with an overhead stab meant to pin Victor's hand to the plastic. Victor moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a man his size. He didn't pull back. He slid forward under the table, using his shoulder to heave the entire bolted-down unit. The metal bolts groaned but held, providing enough leverage for Victor to kick out the ogre's knee from underneath the table. Crack. The ogre screamed as his kneecap shattered. He collapsed forward, his chin hitting the edge of the table with the force of a car crash. The other 6 moved in. This was the wolfpack tactic, surround and swarm. Victor didn't wait to be surrounded. He grabbed his plastic tray. Most people see a tray as a dish. A Spetsnaz operator sees it as a shield and a bladed weapon. He swung the edge of the tray into the throat of the first attacker, the hard plastic catching the man in the larynx. As the man gagged, Victor snatched the shank from his hand. Now Victor was armed. The room erupted. Prisoners scrambled over tables to get away from the kill zone. The guards finally blew their whistles and pulled their pepper spray, but they didn't enter the fray yet. They waited for the blood to stop spraying. Victor moved like a ghost. He didn't use big, theatrical swings. He used the economy of motion. Step, parry, thrust. A shank to the thigh of the second attacker. Pivot, elbow, kidney strike. The third man went down, clutching his back. The ogre, despite his shattered knee, was trying to pull Victor down by his jumpsuit. He was a beast, driven by pure adrenaline. Victor turned, grabbed the ogre by the ears, and drove his forehead into the bridge of the giant's nose. Crunch. Blood sprayed across Victor's face. He didn't blink. He stood over the ogre, the captured shank held in a professional reverse grip. The other 4 AB members had stopped. They were looking at their leader, then at the Russian. They had expected an execution. Instead, they were standing in a butcher shop and they were the meat. "Is this the best Hammer has?" Victor shouted, his voice echoing through the silent dining hall. "Is this the power of your brand?" He reached down, grabbed the ogre by his blood-soaked collar, and dragged him 3 feet across the floor. Victor looked directly at the security camera on the far wall. He knew Hammer was watching the feed in a cell block somewhere. Victor raised the shank, held it to the ogre's eye, and then, with a look of pure disgust, he flicked it away. It skittered across the floor, stopping at the feet of the lead guard. "Tell Hammer," Victor growled, "I am done playing with his children. If he wants me, he must come himself. Or I will come for him." The fallout. The aftermath was a total lockdown. Victorville went dark. No yard time, no dining hall, no showers for a week. Victor was thrown into the whole administrative segregation. He sat in the dark, 6x9 concrete box. No matriz. No book. Just the sound of his own breathing. Most men break in the hole. The silence eats them. But for Victor, the hole was a luxury. It was quiet. It reminded him of the black box interrogation cells in Chechnya, but with better ventilation. He spent 18 hours a day meditating, running through every tactical operation he had ever commanded, keeping his mind sharp as a razor. On the 7th day, the small slot in the door slid open. It wasn't a food tray. It was a note, pushed through by a sympathetic or paid-off guard. Victor picked up the scrap of paper. It was written in a shaky hand. "Victor." Hammer didn't take the warning. "He's going for the nuclear option. He knows about your sister in Vladivostok. He's making a call to the outside. He's not going to kill you. He's going to break you from the world." Victor stared at the note. The calm that had defined him for 45 years finally cracked. A cold, white-hot rage began to boil in his chest. Hammer had crossed the one line a Spetsnaz officer never allows. He had brought the direct action to the family. Victor stood up in the dark cell. He began to do push-ups. One-handed. 200. 300. He wasn't waiting to be released anymore. He was going to break out of the hole. And when he did, Victorville would learn why they call the GRU the Glavnoy Razvedavatelnoy Upravleny. The kindergarten was over. The wolf was hungry. USP Victorville. Administrative segregation, The whole 3 o'clock hours. The silence in Adseg was heavy, like a shroud. But inside cell 104, it was the silence of a cocked pistol. Victor hadn't slept for 48 hours. He didn't need to. He was in a state of bovaya gotovnost, combat readiness. In the dark, he had dismantled the only tool he had, a heavy-duty plastic toothbrush. He had spent hours grinding it against the rough concrete floor until it was a needle-sharp spike. He knew the routine of the night shift guards. Officer Miller was lazy. He did his rounds every 30 minutes, but he always spent 10 minutes in the break room before the 3:30 check. Victor stood up. He didn't feel like an inmate anymore. He felt like the commander of a GRU diversionary group. He had assessed the infrastructure. The vent in the ceiling was secured by 4 hex bolts, but the housing was rusted from years of condensation. He didn't need to go through the door. He needed to go through the lungs of the prison. The ruse. At 3:15, Victor bit deep into his own lip, letting the blood fill his mouth. He then lay on the floor, positioning himself so his head was obscured by the shadows of the bunk, and began to thrash violently. He made a low, wet, gargling sound, the sound of a man drowning in his own tongue. Officer Miller appeared at the small window. He saw the Russian beast, convulsing on the floor, blood pooling around his head. Panic, the amateur's greatest enemy, took over. Miller didn't call for backup. He didn't wait for the supervisor. He thought about the paperwork if a high-value prisoner died on his watch. The heavy steel door buzzed and swung open. Volkov. Hey, don't you die on me, you crazy. Miller stepped inside. He reached for his radio. Victor's seizure ended instantly. He moved with the explosive power of a coiled spring. His hand shot out, grabbing Miller's throat, thumb pressing into the carotid sinus. With his other hand, he caught the radio before it could fall and make a sound. Victor didn't kill him. He was a professional. Guards were just obstacles, not targets. He applied the precise amount of pressure to induce a 3-minute blackout. As Miller went limp, Victor eased him to the floor. He stripped the guard's belt. Keys, radio, flashlight, a can of -4 Malawian Quatches pepper spray. Victor stepped out of the cell. He didn't run. He moved with a rolling, silent gait along the edge of the corridor, staying in the dead zones of the cameras. He knew the layout of the prison's utility basement from a map he'd memorized weeks ago in the library. Hammer was hiding in the boiler room. It was the only place in the prison where the Aryan Brotherhood had total control over the staff. It was where the nuclear option call would be made. The infiltration. Victor descended the service stairs into the bowels of Victorville. The temperature rose 20 degrees. The air was thick with the smell of scorched oil and old rust. He heard voices, low, urgent. Did you get through to Vladivostok? It was Hammer's voice. It was trembling. The king was afraid. Line's busy. Boss, we're using the patched-in burner. The connection to the Russian contact is slow, but we'll have the sister's address by 4 o'clock. Once the boys in Russia get the word, Volkov is done. Victor stopped behind a massive steam pipe. His pulse was a steady 60 beats per minute. He checked the radio he'd taken from the guard. It was chirping with confused chatter from the block. They'd found the empty cell. He had 5 minutes. Victor reached into the electrical subpanel near the door. He didn't need a map for this. Every Soviet-built facility he'd sabotaged in the 90s had similar schematics. He pulled the main breaker for the basement sector and jammed the mechanism with the guard's heavy key ring. Snap! The lights died. The hum of the machinery groaned into a halt. Total pitch-black darkness. The dark room. Inside the boiler room, the AB members panicked. What the hell? Check the lights. Get the flashlights out. 3 beams of light cut through the dark, frantically searching the room. It's him, Hammer whispered. He's here. I told you. He's a devil. Shut up, Stone. There's 4 of us and he's one naked Russian. Guard the door. Victor wasn't at the door. He was in the rafters. He dropped silently behind the first man, a tattooed kid holding a heavy pipe. Victor didn't use a weapon. He used the edge of his hand. One strike to the base of the skull. The kid went down like a sack of grain. One light gone. Jake? Jake! Where are you? Victor picked up a loose bolt from the floor and threw it into the far corner. Clang. The two remaining guards turned their lights toward the noise. Victor slid under the shadow of a massive water tank. He moved like smoke. He was behind the second man before the echo of the bolt had even died. A quick, brutal snap of the arm, followed by a knee to the temple. Two down. He's in the walls. He's in the walls! The third man screamed, firing a smuggled handgun blindly into the dark. Bang! 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 The muzzle flashes illuminated the room for a microsecond. In those flashes, Victor saw Hammer. The Grand Dragon was cowering behind a furnace, clutching a cell phone like a holy relic. Victor didn't fear the gun. He timed the shots. 1, 2, gap. In the gap, Victor lunged. He caught the gunman's wrist, twisting it upward. The fourth shot went into the ceiling, shattering a steam pipe. A jet of scalding white vapor hissed into the room, creating a fog that made the flashlights useless. Victor delivered a three-punch combination to the man's ribs and solar plexus. The man collapsed, gasping for air he couldn't find. Then there was only Hammer. The reckoning. Hammer scrambled backward, his back hitting the hot metal of the main boiler. He held the cell phone out as if it were a shield. Stay back. I'm making the call. I'll do it, Volkov. One button and your sister dies. Victor stepped out of the steam. He looked like a nightmare. His orange jumpsuit was torn. His skin was slick with sweat and the blood of his lip, and his eyes. His eyes were the last thing a man sees before the end of the world. The phone is not working, Mason, Victor said. His voice was a calm, terrifying whisper that cut through the hiss of the steam. I cut the repeater in the hallway. You are talking to ghosts. Hammer looked at the phone. No signal. The king of Victorville began to cry. Not a warrior's cry, but the pathetic sob of a bully who had finally run out of victims. Please, please, it was just business. You didn't pay the tax. I had to. Victor reached out and grabbed Hammer by the throat. He lifted the 250-pound man off his feet with one arm, pinning him against the burning boiler. Hammer shrieked as the heat singed through his shirt. Tax? Victor asked. You think you are a tax collector? You are a parasite. You live off the fear of children. Victor tightened his grip. Hammer's face turned a dark, bruised plum color. You mentioned my sister, Victor said, his face inches from Hammer's. That was your strategic error. In my world, we do not threaten families. We protect them by erasing people like you from the map. Victor didn't snap his neck. That would be too quick. He dropped Hammer to the floor. The giant fell in a heap, gasping. Victor picked up the cell phone. He looked at the contacts. You think you have friends in Vladivostok? Victor asked. Those people you called, they were not my enemies. They were my former students. They did not answer you because they were waiting for me to tell them what to do with your contact. Over there. Victor dialed a number. He spoke 3 words in Russian. Liquidation. Direct action. He closed the phone and crushed it under his boot. Now, Victor said, looking down at the shivering man, you are going to tell the guards exactly how you organized the attack in the dining hall. You are going to tell them about the money you paid Miller. You are going to dismantle your own kingdom, Mason, or I will come back every night. And next time, I will not be so kindergarten. The aftermath, the great Victorville riot never happened. Instead, there was a great purification. Mason Stone, broken and terrified, confessed to everything. The Aryan Brotherhood's power in B Block evaporated overnight as their leader was hauled away to a psychiatric ward, claiming a Siberian demon was haunting his dreams. Officer Miller and 3 other guards were indicted on federal racketeering charges. Viktor Volkov was moved, not to the hole but to a different facility entirely. The feds realized that keeping him in a cage with gangs was like putting a shark in a bathtub with goldfish. It was a liability. Epilogue, a different kind of peace. USP Florence ADX, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Victor sat in his cell. It was the most secure prison in the world. Total isolation. He didn't mind. It was quiet. The door slot opened. A tray of food came through. It was decent. Better than the oatmeal at Victorville. A letter followed. Victor opened it. It was a photo from Vladivostok. His sister standing in front of a small dacha, smiling. On the back in Russian, "The garden is beautiful this year, Victor. We are safe. The friends you sent are very helpful." Victor leaned back against the concrete wall. He closed his eyes. He was a weapon and he was in a box. But the world was a little quieter now. The kindergartners were gone. The wolf was at rest. The end.